We've talked about important motorcycle innovations, the big inventions added to make bikes significantly better, and sort of the little improvements that have carried over till today. The kind of stuff that just isn't going anywhere anytime soon, things like disc brakes or ABS or traction control. But with any long, storied industry, you're bound to have some ideas flop, and that's kind of what this video is about. Not so much bad ideas, just inventions and innovations that, for whatever reason, really haven't caught on. So without further ado, let's jump in and look at 10 motorcycle innovations that just didn't catch on. Let's kick things off with a feature that has existed on a few different motorcycles in history, and even today one specifically, and that is all-wheel drive or two-wheel drive. And the most well-known company that utilizes this is Rokon with their big, and that's right, all-wheel drive. Now you can buy all-wheel drive kits for other motorcycles like you're seeing here with KTM's big adventure bike, and the advantages are obvious. Way more traction, right? But I don't believe that this feature of having two-wheel or all-wheel drive motorcycles or an option to turn it on comes as stock on any major. I mean, it floats for God's sake, just in case you drive the thing straight into a river. But the all-wheel drive on this bike is really quite novel. It's very mechanical. It's basically a drivetrain that travels up from the transmission under the tank to a transfer box between the handlebars, which essentially drives a sprocket and chain to the front wheel. It's really simple, but really effective, and it makes it so that Rokons can travel up massive hills and over large rocks and logs and just do things that other motorcycles, basically all other motorcycles in the world, cannot. Now, I'm sure there are good reasons dirt bikes and adventure bikes from the major manufacturers have not yet employed this, but to me, this really should be something that, could be paid extra for, like an extra feature on some of the big adventure bikes. And this all-wheel drive feature, this really is why people get Rokons. This is what people want from them, is, having both of those big wheels able to be utilized on like all sorts of terrain makes it so that this bike can do things that other motorcycles just simply cannot. Number 9 goes to grip shifts. So classic Vespas and Lambrettas have this awesome little feature that really never caught on beyond these two marks and didn't really carry on into the future either. But basically, instead of having the clutch and the shifter in two different places, as is common for any manual transmission, whether you're using a car or a motorcycle, the clutch and the shifter are both a part of the left grip. So essentially, you pull in the clutch and then twist the whole mechanism, like the entire grip, into gear and then let the clutch out. And it's great because you can easily see what gear you're in right there, almost like an early gear indicator, but better than my old Triumph's gear indicator, which is way down on top of the transmission. But I do use that sometimes, guys. But that's it. You pull in the clutch, twist the whole mechanism, and then let the clutch out. It's so genius and simple and really innovative. The best kind of innovations are the ones that are simple and make sense. But for whatever reason, I don't believe that this really went beyond these two Italian scooters. I'm curious if any of you experts watching this video could tell us why. I'm sure that these had their problems, but, so do most transmissions. But outside of scooters, because that entire market has really moved away from any sort of manual transmission altogether, for the most part, I do wonder if this could work on just traditional motorcycles. It seems like a really sensible option. Now, number 8 goes to really any form of front suspension beyond just the typical double fork tubes. But specifically, though, I find it odd that no companies, for the most part, have really taken on the novel form of suspension used on the Great Britain motorcycles. About that story, and I believe it's my most viewed video. Anyways, Britain created a form of front suspension. Basically, this was a fully adjustable girder-style suspension with an Öhlins racing shock fitted right in the middle. And it's pretty complex, but the thing to know is that it has serious advantages over the traditional front fork setup. But here's the thing, it looks very different. And I think it's difficult for companies to fathom what their bikes would look like with this form of suspension. I mean, traditional suspension is part of the overall design of motorcycles, and because, the setup that we have today on motorcycles hasn't really changed much over the past 50 years, it's become part of the design. Function has its purpose, but in this case, when you change this function, you would be changing the design so much of the motorcycle that I think it would hurt branding for people and for companies. So I think that's really the main reason why, because this has so many advantages over the traditional setup. All right, number 7, we have, sort of the autoped, you could call it. Now, there have been quite a few sort of hybrid car motorcycles over the past 100 years, from large coach chair bikes to today, those weird three-wheeled things that are technically considered motorcycles. Never really understood that one. But specifically, I'm talking about motorcycles, true two-wheeled vehicles though that did technically have three wheels. The BMW C1 was a true two-wheeler, but like all other attempts at sort of making a car motorcycle, video about the Electrom, sort of version of this idea, but slightly different. Regardless, these sort of motorcycle car hybrids just haven't stuck, and in my opinion, it makes sense. Motorcycles are about the kind of automatic transmission that we see in cars, a transmission that runs through the gears up and down on its own. In the 70s, Honda released what was known as the Honda-matic. This type of transmission would take multiple forms, but essentially it removed the need for a clutch. You still had to shift, but there was no need to fiddle with clutch action. And the goal here was to make the 750cc platform from Honda even more accessible to new or non-riders, but it never really took off the way that Honda would have wished, despite it being a great platform. Now, the closest thing we have is Honda's current DCT, which is utilized on multiple premium motorcycles in their lineup. Though the setup is different, it functions basically like an automatic for the user. Electric motorcycles are similar, again, in experience, no need for shifting or clutch action, but still a purely conventional automatic transmission like we see in virtually every modern car. That system just really hasn't taken off in the motorcycle world. Number 3 on motorcycles, and honestly, lots of the other new rider aids that might be coming just don't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I get more comfort and better safety options. I understand that to some extent, but personally, I don't want a computer taking over the controls when I'm on a motorcycle. It's just not the same as a car. Traction control and ABS are fine, but I don't know, leave the turning to me. That's why I'm riding a motorcycle. It's not just to get to, point A. It's to be able to have that input and that experience of being in complete control. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe people would be interested in riding self-driving motorcycles, but I just don't really get the point. All right, number 2 on our list goes to hub center steering. Now, this is one of those novel ideas that does seem to make sense on paper and has been used in various two-wheeled applications dating all the way back to the early 1900s. Basically, the wheel essentially rotates on a pivot on the front axle instead of the traditional fork setup where the wheel turns with, the forks and the entire headstock. Essentially, you're separating the braking and suspension mechanics from the steering mechanics, which is good in theory, but again, really hasn't proven itself. Now, this is most notably used on some Bimota motorcycles and some other bespoke bikes, but really the only attempt that I know of from a major manufacturer was Honda's GTS 1000 from the mid-90s, a bike that did have some advantages utilizing this, but again, the extra cost and weight really didn't outweigh the advantages. I wonder if hub center steering could be the future of motorcycles in terms of even high performance bikes, but it's just not something that has received enough attention from major manufacturers, and it hasn't had that investment to potentially take over. But at this point, it's just really not going anywhere. Now, last on our list is really a true tragedy, and that is turbocharged motorcycles. And you could lump superchargers into this as well, but that system has proven itself to really make at least some sense with the H2 platform from Kawasaki, but turbocharged bikes are really a different story. Sure, there are plenty of turbo boostas out there, and Yami Noob's recent set of videos delving into actually having one built is really interesting. But even those videos really show how much it costs and how much work it is to do this. A turbo boosta doesn't really make much sense practically, at least for production motorcycles. I mean, maybe supercharged bikes don't really either, but I think a turbo boosta could cost maybe even more than an H2 if Suzuki actually decided to go that route. Now, the 1980s were kind of a golden era for production turbo bikes. There was the Honda CX line, and other manufacturers like Suzuki got in on it. But in the end, the reality was that a 1000cc superbike without a turbo was still just faster than the ones with turbos. Turbo bikes are significantly heavier. Now, with the right work done, of course, a turbo-powered Hayabusa produces ridiculous power, and it does work in a straight line. But in terms of overall performance and weight, turbo-powered bikes just don't make a whole lot of sense in the market as a whole. I still think that Suzuki should just man up and at least make a version of a turbo Busa with more horsepower than the H2. I think it's time Suzuki made stupid motorcycles again. But I think we all know that's probably not happening. All right, guys, there you have it. 10 motorcycle innovations that really never caught on. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and make sure to let us know down in the comments if there's any ones that I missed, because obviously there's lots of other things that also have not really caught on in the motorcycle world. So hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're riding safe, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.